Before we step into the shadow of pyramids or pass through the gates of ancient cities, we must first understand a truth that shaped an entire continent's architecture. In ancient Africa, a building was never just a building. It was a living prayer. Every line, every curve, every stone placement carried intention. The ground plan of a city wasn't drawn to impress merchants or please kings. It was designed to align with the will of the Creator and the rhythms of the natural world. These civilizations believed that space itself was sacred. The land was not an empty canvas to be conquered. It was a partner, a being with its own spirit. To build carelessly was to offend it. To build in harmony was to invite blessing. Urban planning was not a technical afterthought. It was a spiritual act. In Kush, cities hugged the Nile like children clinging to a mother's embrace, mirroring the river's path of life and renewal. In Mali, the positioning of mosques, markets, and courtyards created a flow of air, light, and shadow that echoed the balance of the cosmos. In Aksum, great stelae stood not just as memorials, but as cosmic markers, aligned to the rising sun and celestial events. Geometry was not a mere tool for measurement, it was the language of the divine. Shapes, proportions, and alignments became codes to draw harmony from the unseen world into the human one. In these traditions, to live in a city meant more than having shelter. It meant waking each day inside a physical embodiment of your people's relationship with the Creator, your ancestors, and the forces of nature. They were not building for this lifetime alone. They were building for eternity. When people think of pyramids, their minds race to Giza, colossal tombs for Egypt's pharaohs, towering over the desert. But here's the twist most history books skip. The land of Kush in present-day Sudan built more pyramids than Egypt ever did. And they weren't copies. They were something different, something deeply tied to a unique spiritual vision. In Kush, pyramids rose in clusters, their sides steep and narrow, crowned with small chapels at the front. These chapels weren't afterthoughts. They were the heart of the design. They acted as doorways between worlds, where offerings were made and prayers carried into the realm of the ancestors. To the Kushites, death was not an end, but a transformation. The pyramid was not just a tomb, it was an engine for rebirth. Its angles mirrored the rays of the sun, guiding the soul upward toward the heavens. The steepness of their design wasn't just style, it was a spiritual shortcut, a direct descent to the divine realm. Even their placement had meaning. Many pyramids stood near the Nile, close enough that the river's seasonal floods could be seen as a metaphor for resurrection, the land dying in drought only to rise again with the water's return. Inside, walls bore inscriptions and images of gods like Ammonius, Isis, and Osiris, deities adopted from Egypt but reshaped in Kush's own spiritual vocabulary. The messages were clear. This was not about the king alone. This was about ensuring the balance between the living, the dead, and the eternal forces that sustain the kingdom. And perhaps the most intriguing detail? Kush's pyramid-building tradition lasted over 1,000 years after Egypt stopped building theirs. While Egypt's golden age faded, Kush kept raising these sacred mountains of stone as if to say, "We will not let the bridge between this world and the next crumble." The pyramids of Kush stand today, not as mere ruins, but as silent sermons carved into the desert, reminders that for these people, power was never separated from the sacred. In the rolling hills of southern Africa, far from the Nile and the deserts of Kush, stand the silent stones of Great Zimbabwe. No pyramids, no towering obelisks. Instead, vast curving walls of granite, built without mortar, rising as high as the walls of a fortress, yet serving no simple military purpose. These walls didn't keep enemies out. They kept the spirit of the kingdom in. The Great Enclosure, the most famous of these structures, is a marvel of precision. The granite blocks were shaped to fit together so perfectly that time itself has failed to pull them apart. No binding cement, no iron supports, just stone upon stone, held in place by the skill and patience of the builders, and the belief that strength comes from unity. But the layout was more than technical genius. The walls created a sacred boundary, separating the royal and spiritual heart of the city from the rest of the settlement. Inside, leaders lived and ruled, surrounded by symbols of fertility and ancestral power. Archaeologists have found soapstone birds mounted on pillars, half eagle, half human, possibly representing the kings as divine mediators between earth and sky. Even the curves of the walls held meaning. Unlike the straight, rigid lines of European fortresses, Great Zimbabwe's walls flowed like rivers, echoing the natural shapes of the land. In Shona belief, the ancestors lived in the landscape itself. By building in harmony with the hills and valleys, the city became a place where human power and ancestral presence overlapped. And then there's the mystery of the tower, a massive conical structure inside the Great Enclosure. No entrance, no staircase, no chambers within. Many believe it was a granary, a symbol of wealth and life. Others think it was a cosmic marker representing the link between the heavens, the land, and the people. Either way, it stood as a reminder that the ruler was not just a political leader, he was the guardian of abundance. Great Zimbabwe was more than a city. It was a living shrine, where the walls themselves whispered of kingship, fertility, and the invisible thread tying the living to the dead. In the highlands of northern Ethiopia, the ancient kingdom of Aksum left behind monuments so massive, so precise, that even today they seem almost impossible for human hands to have raised. These are the steely, giant obelisks carved from a single piece of granite, some towering over 30 meters high, weighing hundreds of tons. They are not merely stone pillars. They are prayers frozen in rock. Each stela is carved to resemble a multi-story building, complete with windows, doors, and decorative frames. But these buildings were never meant for the living. They were markers for tombs, gateways for the souls of the dead to ascend into the divine realm. In Aksumite belief, death was not a descent into darkness but an elevation into light, and the stelae were the ladders. The tallest of them, now fallen, is believed to have been the largest monolith ever erected in the ancient world. The effort to carve it, transport it, and raise it would have required thousands of workers, an incredible level of engineering, and a staggering amount of faith. But their genius didn't end with sheer size. The stelae were placed with astronomical precision. Some align with the sun's position on key dates, possibly marking seasonal festivals or royal anniversaries. Others seem to echo the patterns of the stars, as if the kingdom itself was mapping heaven onto earth. To Aksum, architecture was diplomacy with the gods. Every stone placement was a negotiation, a plea for the kingdom's prosperity and divine favor. The ruling elite were not just kings, they were spiritual custodians whose duty was to ensure harmony between heaven and earth. And the city that surrounded these monuments was no ordinary capital. Aksum was a crossroads of Africa, Arabia, and the Mediterranean, a place where merchants traded gold, ivory, and frankincense, but also ideas, faiths and symbols. Over time, the kingdom embraced Christianity, yet the stelae remained as towering reminders of a more ancient spiritual order. Even now, in the heart of Ethiopia, some of these stone prayers still stand, defying centuries of wind and rain, silent witnesses to a civilization that built not just for the living, but for the eternal journey of the soul. In the heart of West Africa, where the desert meets the Niger River, the Empire of Mali rose to become one of the wealthiest civilizations in the medieval world. Gold, salt, and scholarship flowed through its cities, but so did something less tangible yet just as powerful: faith. Here, architecture wasn't carved from granite or stacked in monumental stone, it was sculpted from earth itself. From the great city of Djenné to the legendary university city of Timbuktu, buildings were made of sun-baked mud mixed with rice husks, shaped into towering walls and crowned with spires that pierced the desert sky. The most famous of these is the Great Mosque of Djenné, the largest mud brick building in the world. Its walls are thick, keeping the interior cool even under the blazing sun. Wooden beams protrude from the surface, not only as decoration but as permanent scaffolding for the yearly ritual of replastering, when the whole community gathers to renew the mosque's skin. This was more than maintenance. It was a ceremony of unity, binding the people together in a shared act of devotion. Mali's architecture breathed with the desert. Narrow streets cast deep shadows, channeling cool breezes. Courtyards open to the sky, offering places for prayer and contemplation under the stars. The city was designed to flow with nature, not fight it. But beneath its practicality lay layers of symbolism. The mosque's towers were said to represent fingers raised in prayer. The mihrab, the niche pointing toward Mecca, was often intricately decorated, blending Islamic geometry with West African artistic motifs, creating a fusion of Sufi mysticism and local tradition. And this was no provincial faith. Timbuktu's mosques, libraries, and schools made the city one of the great intellectual capitals of the world. Scholars debated theology, astronomy, law, and philosophy in spaces designed to inspire both the mind and the soul. Here, architecture was not just shelter, it was a living canvas of faith, reshaped each year by the hands of the community, infused with the rhythm of prayer and the heartbeat of the desert. In the dense rainforests of what is now southern Nigeria, the Kingdom of Benin rose as one of Africa's most sophisticated and artistically brilliant civilizations. At its heart stood not just a palace, but an entire sacred city within a city. The Royal Palace of Benin was a sprawling complex of courtyards, ceremonial halls, and living quarters, all arranged according to spiritual and political principles. The Oba, the king, was not just a ruler. He was a divine figure, the living bridge between the human world and the realm of the gods and ancestors. The palace's architecture made this truth visible to everyone who entered. Each courtyard had a purpose. Some were public, where the Oba addressed his people. Others were private, reserved for rituals, council, and ancestral veneration. The spatial arrangement mirrored the structure of the kingdom itself, power radiating outward from a sacred center. The walls and columns were adorned with the famous Benin bronzes, intricate plaques and sculptures that told the kingdom's story in shimmering metal. They were not mere decoration. They were historical archives, spiritual symbols, and political statements all at once. Scenes of battles, processions, and rituals reminded visitors that the Oba's authority came not just from conquest, but from divine mandate. Even the city beyond the palace was shaped by sacred geometry. Streets were laid out in straight lines leading toward the royal compound, reinforcing the idea that all paths led back to the Oba, the source of order, prosperity, and protection. The palace was more than a residence. It was a living ritual space, where every column, every courtyard, and every bronze plaque reinforced the sacred nature of kingship. When the British invaded in 1897, they looted thousands of these bronzes, scattering them across museums worldwide. But even in their absence, the spirit of the palace survives. In the oral traditions of the Edo people, in the surviving architecture, and in the enduring belief that leadership, in its truest form, is a sacred trust. Not all sacred architecture in Africa reached toward the sky like Aksum's stele or stretched across the land like Great Zimbabwe's walls. Some of it was far more intimate, woven directly into the rhythm of daily life. In many African societies, the sacred was not confined to temples or palaces. It was present in courtyards, market squares, and even the smallest village huts, spaces where the everyday merged seamlessly with the divine. Take the initiation hut. In parts of southern and central Africa, these circular structures were more than shelters. They were spiritual classrooms where young men and women learned the histories, laws, and sacred duties of their people. The round shape symbolized unity and continuity, while the fire at the center mirrored the sun, the eternal source of life. In West Africa, compounds were often built with seasonal alignments in mind. Certain thresholds faced the sunrise on planting days, or the sunset on harvest festivals, binding the community's agricultural cycle to cosmic patterns. Even the placement of a doorway could be deliberate, positioned so that a visitor entered with their right side facing the central hearth, a sign of respect to the ancestors. Natural elements were not simply included, they were integrated. Trees were left standing at the heart of a village, serving as meeting points and ritual sites. Water channels were carved into settlement layouts, ensuring that life-giving flows mirrored spiritual beliefs about purity and renewal. Royal courts in kingdoms like the Ashanti and the Zulu were not just political arenas. They were theatrical stages for ceremony, where the movement of people, the placement of drums, and the approach to the throne all followed sacred choreography. These spaces remind us that African architecture was not limited to monumental wonders. It was about living inside a belief system, where every wall, path, and open space was part of an ongoing conversation between humanity, nature, and the spirit world. In this way, the entire community became a kind of temple. Not a building you visited, but a living structure you inhabited every single day. The stones may be weathered. The mud walls may crumble. The bronze plaques may hang far from home in foreign museums. But the spirit of Africa's sacred architecture is not dead. It is still breathing in the cities, villages, and creative visions of today. Walk through modern Addis Ababa, and you'll see church designs that echo the ancient stele of Aksum. In Nigeria, the rhythm of Benin's palace courtyard still shapes how chiefs receive guests and hold councils. In Mali, the annual replastering of Djenné Mosque continues, not as a relic, but as a living tradition, binding communities together just as it did centuries ago. These are not coincidences. they are continuities. The same principles that guided the architects of Kush, Mali, and Great Zimbabwe, alignment with nature, harmony with the cosmos, and the inseparable link between faith and function, are still at work today. But here's the challenge. For centuries, Western narratives dismissed these achievements, labeling them as primitive or attributing them to outside influence. The idea that Africa could produce complex, spiritually rich architecture, rooted in its own genius, was buried under colonial prejudice. Reclaiming this story isn't just about pride. It's about truth. It's about understanding that these civilizations didn't just build walls and monuments, they built entire worlds where the material and the spiritual flowed together. And there's a lesson here for us. In an age of glass towers and concrete blocks, perhaps we've forgotten that buildings can be more than shelter. They can be symbols, rituals, even prayers made solid. So the next time you see an ancient ruin in Africa, don't just think of it as the past. Think of it as a voice, still whispering across centuries, reminding us that true architecture doesn't just house the body, it nourishes the soul. These are not just ruins. They are messages carved in stone, in mud, in bronze. Messages from ancestors who understood that a building could be a prayer and a city could be a temple. If this journey opened your eyes to the genius of Africa's spiritual architecture, don't let the story stop here. Share it. Teach it. Visit these places if you can and feel their power for yourself. Because the more we uncover, the more we realize Africa didn't just build monuments, it built meaning. And that meaning still belongs to us today.